Good morning, everyone. I'm Stuart Cressman, Chair of Swine Innovation Porc. It's our privilege as a research body for the Canadian industry to welcome you to our ASF African Swine Fever seminar today. This is going to be a jam-packed seminar, an hour and 15 minutes with 6 speakers and a question and answer at the end. So it is going to be a shotgun approach to a variety of topics. I think you will find it of interest. We thank you for attending. This is our 4th seminar. The other 3 were in-person seminars at Banff. This year, it's a little different format given COVID-19, but I think we have an excellent group of speakers that will inform you on a variety of topics and ask if you have questions that you click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, type in your question, and we'll try to get to as many as possible at the end. And I think with that, you didn't come here to listen to me. I'm a producer here in Southern Ontario and have had the opportunity since 2010, the inception of Swine Innovation Porc, to be on their board. Currently their chair. Our first speaker is going to handle a topic, African swine fever priorities, research priorities in Canada. He's well equipped to handle this. He has chaired a subcommittee of a variety of experts developing ASF priorities for the research sector here in Canada. Andrew Van Kessel currently is Associate Director of Research at VIDO-Intervac, formerly was chair of the department at the University of Saskatchewan, held a variety of posts there, took his PhD there at University of Saskatchewan as well. And he chairs a board member and he chairs Swine Innovation Porc's Science Advisory Board. And he's been an invaluable resource at the board level on all things science, contributes to our understanding, and helps us determine research, the nuances of research going forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to make his first presentation.
All right, thank you, Stuart, for the introduction. I'm very pleased to, and good morning, everyone, very pleased to be here representing Swine Innovation Porc and briefly sharing with you the activities of our organization over the past couple of years, I guess, helping the Canadian swine industry address the threat of ASF. You know, I thought it would be valuable to just briefly draw your attention to the vision and mission statement for Swine Innovation Porc. SIP is a producer-funded organization. It has a national mandate in the research and knowledge and technology transfer areas. And my comments will be in the context of the research agenda around ASF. There is obviously a great deal of effort that's ongoing, broader effort among multiple industry stakeholders addressing operational and policy related issues around ASF, and those broader activities will be summarized by John Ross of CPC in the presentation following mine. So as Stuart mentioned, one of our major activities has been to develop a list of research priorities for the Canadian industry around ASF. And of course, if you're going to develop a list of priorities, it's important to begin from an area and from an informed position. And we were extremely fortunate to have a very respected group of swine health veterinarians and infectious disease scientists who were freely giving of their time and they're listed here to help us with this process. And I do want to thank each of these panel members for their contributions. We had a number of meetings where we were able to review this issue and establish a list of priorities. I would mention that Alfonso Calvillo, the Executive Director at the National Center for Foreign Animal Diseases, who was a member of this panel, left that position about a year ago, and I would thank Dr. Ambagala for filling in for Alfonso in the time since then. I'd also like to recognize, particularly recognize Paul Sundberg. He's the Executive Director of Swine Health Information Center. You know, Paul, not only were we privileged with Paul's expertise, but we're also able then to have his knowledge of the research ongoing in the US, so that we were moving forward in a collaborative manner and by avoiding duplication. So that was highly valuable to this process. The group then, we were able to put together, with the support of the panel and with input from the Swine Innovation Porc board, we were able to identify 6 major subject areas containing ASF research priorities. And those areas are listed for you here. Not surprisingly, I guess, surveillance and animal health was an area which contained a large number of research priorities. You know, examples here would include the development of rapid ASF diagnostic tests, including pen-side tests, sampling protocols for biological fluids, from oral fluids to meat to validating protocols for feed sampling, for example. Development of antivirals that would help perhaps to reduce the transmission of disease in the case of an outbreak, and the kind of feed mitigation strategies that Scott D, many of you may have heard Scott D's presentation yesterday regarding feed mitigation strategies. So these are all priority or examples of priority areas in the surveillance and animal health subject area. Biosecurity, primarily here we were looking at the issue of wild pigs. Can we eradicate them preferably, or at least manage wild pigs as a potential reservoir for ASF, a significant problem requiring some research focus. Another example there would be the validation of disinfection agents for the ASF virus that would allow barns to repopulate, for example. I think we're all familiar with the logistical and humane challenges associated with math euthanasia. We'll hear from Mark Flynn later in this webinar about work that's ongoing in Manitoba with respect to mass euthanasia, an area that could use some additional research focus, including the need to be able to dispose of carcasses in a manner that does not cause distribution of the virus and hopefully inactivates the virus. Mental health, of course, is a huge concern. Mental health of all participants in the Canadian swine industry. Again, from a research perspective here, you know, is there work that can be done to identify the most vulnerable participants? Are there approaches that are best suited to the unique environment of the Canadian swine industry? Similarly, for economic impact, from a research perspective, we'd be asking whether, you know, an examination of similar cases where we saw an abrupt end into business activity in the livestock industry, if we were to study those cases, would we identify best practices for preserving that industry and for facilitating its rapid return to economic sustainability? Knowledge transfer, again, a major area of interest for Swine Innovation Porc. Again, from a research perspective, are there best practices in terms of transferring and maintaining biosecurity practices? And are we able to engage our small-scale producers and work collaboratively with small-scale producers to protect the Canadian swine industry? So of course, Swine Innovation Porc would be pleased if we could fund projects in all of these areas right now as a major priority. As always, of course, funding is never easy to come by. I'd remind the audience that Swine Innovation Porc, the industry funds that are allocated to SIP from 2018 through 2023 are largely or near fully committed to our ongoing swine cluster program, to projects in a number of priority areas that have been identified by the industry. So this ongoing commitment then does provide us with some challenge in terms of identifying funds to support an emerging issue like ASF. Nevertheless, we have been able to fund a couple of projects, and I won't spend much time talking about these, or co-fund a couple of projects and send limited funds to these principal investigators. We'll hear from Dr. Ambagala later today in terms of the use of oral fluids in ASF surveillance, and we'll hear from Dr. Pettit with respect to his efforts to develop a small survey of small-scale swine holders. So SIP was, again, with other partners, pleased to be able to provide at least limited funds to get these projects underway. For the researchers in the audience, we do have a current call out for research project ideas. SIP will be putting together an application. We'll be selecting project ideas and putting together an application to the Canadian Agriculture Strategic Priorities Program. This is an AAFC managed program that's designed to support sector-wide priorities to address emerging issues. We certainly feel that ASF meets this criteria, and as a not-for-profit organization supported by the swine industry, SIP is eligible as an applicant here and can leverage partner funds that have been identified by our Canadian investigators. So we're looking forward to proceeding on that progress and receiving project ideas from the Canadian research community and moving forward with this idea. Looking for more information, you can find more on our website. Please feel free to visit it. If you have specific questions, ask them in the Q&A session, or if you're thinking of it after the webinar today, send us an email at info@swineinnovationporc.ca. We'd be happy to answer your questions directly. So I look forward to answering your questions at the end of the webinar, and I will turn it back to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that presentation and the information that you conveyed. Next up is John Ross, who joined the Canadian Pork Council as its executive director after a 30-year career with Agriculture Agri-Food Canada. John doesn't seem that old, but he somehow completed that degree, that time of service. He was director of the animal industry division prior to retiring and then joining Canadian Pork Council. Certainly preventing and in the presence of an outbreak, trying to contain or working with CFIA and containment and of African swine fever in Canada. It was one of John's marching orders, and he's active in a variety of committees. I don't know how he gets all those committee work done in the busy period of a year ago, a year and a half ago, when it seemed he was going in a variety of directions. I am pleased to say he's been a great contributor around our board table. You always know where John stands on a variety of issues. And John, I want you to take away your topic. What is Canada doing to face the threat of ASF?
Thank you very much, Stuart. Let me just fire up my screen here. Hopefully we can get it to roll. Oh, hang on here. No, got it all locked up. Not helpful. All right, we seem making some progress there. I apologize for the delay here, and I'm going to get Mary to pop up the presentation. We'll see if we can work from her screen as opposed to mine. One of the things that the Canadian Pork Council is lobbying for is better rural internet, and you'll see it in fine action here this morning. Marie, if you jump ahead there to the next slide. Stuart's started out with quite a task for me today. He's asked me to talk about what Canada is doing to face the threat of ASF and do it in 10 minutes. And one of my board members is on the call, suggested I should do that without rambling. So it's going to be a bit of an issue for me, but we're going to charge on as best we can. Read the next slide, please. So you're asking me to talk about a big problem, and it comes with really, really big challenges. And welcome to ASF, right? So collaboration right off the top. A large, complex supply chain. The Canadian pork industry is not a small chain. It is big. It is cumbersome. It stretches from coast to coast. It involves people that have a couple of pigs to people that have many thousands. ASF affects multiple governments. We are dealing with three levels of government: federal government, provincial government, and if we get into wild pigs or feral hogs, into municipal governments, multiple departments. It's not a single event which is handled by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. This implicates a wide range of departments. We have to deal with wild pigs, and we didn't know where they are, let alone how many we have. We've discovered small lot producers, and trying to figure out how they play in this file, and how big, how small of a risk they present to the industry. But certainly a group that we have to deal with. We've come to embrace concepts like zoning, compartmentalization, and of course the underlying pillars of those: biosecurity, traceability, surveillance. And we have this entire discussion about managing a hog surplus. So if we, as a country, export plus or minus 70% of what we produce, if we lose all of our export markets, what are we going to do with that surplus, and how do we manage that? So Marie, if we can flip along here. So if we look at how to do it, well, of course, instantly in Canada we turn our attention to putting together action plans. We have an African swine fever action plan, and it has 4 pillars to it: biosecurity, preparedness, business continuity, communications. And in that space, nothing that would actually surprise anybody, either that we A, had a plan, or B, that it had those pillars associated with it. But I think a unique thing, and something I would hold out some attention to, is the pillar champions. And so we have a champion, myself, on biosecurity. Colleen Barnes is at executive vice president level at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, dealing with a whole series of issues around preparedness. Morgan Curran-Blaney, who's the lead at the vice president level at Maple Leaf Foods, the lead on their pork, fresh pork business, leading up business continuity, and Dr. Greg Worley from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Foods, the current chair of the communications group. So what you're seeing there is a really nice mix of leadership, I think, from both the industry and from government, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and OMAF, or the provincial government. So an important concept that all of us involved and all of us taken active involvement. Marie? We'll spend 2 seconds on this chart. Suffice to say that it's a lot of committees, a lot of committees that meet a lot of times, and this just happens to be the national level. There are a whole series of these at the provincial and the regional level as well. And one of the tricks that one of the challenges we have is to get all these cats running in the same direction. Lots of good work being done on a wide range of topics, from wild pigs through to destruction and disposal, and you'll hear more of that today. But the fact is that there's a lot of people that are spending a lot of time trying to get this this African swine fever file under control. Marie? And this lady, and what does she do anyway? It's an interesting question. For those of you in the hog industry, the pork industry, everybody will be quick to recognize Dr. Megan Bergman. Megan is a former CVO in Manitoba. She's been a friend of the pork sector for a long, long time. She's certainly a friend of the animal industry here in Canada. And she is the current executive director of the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council. In that role, she chairs the African Swine Fever Executive Management Board. And this is the group that is trying to corral all of the bits and pieces and get them headed in the same way. And all of that task largely been fallen on top of Dr. Bergman. Again, an interesting view here where we have a group, the National Farmed Animal Health and Welfare Council, that is taking on this leadership role, and the council, for those that don't know it, is a group that made up of industry and government. And under Megan's leadership, we are making some fair progress in getting that action plan up and running. Next slide. The challenge you have, though, is that we're trying not to mistake planning for action, and damn, we're good at planning. That next step's a little bit harder. We're going to talk a little bit about things that have happened here, and I'm just going to give you a quick thumbnail of them over the next 4 or 5 minutes, and certainly welcome any questions as we go forward. Marie? Top 10 actions. The fact that this ASF Executive Management Board exists, it meets every second week. It meets in person for sort of quarterly for full days. Senior leadership across industry and government. This is clearly a high priority item for a lot of people, and that it exists, it is taking control, it is committed, it is doing things. I think is probably one of our top 10 actions. We can fuss about the order of these, but I do think they all matter. We are seeing some money coming forward, and it comes in different bits and pieces and forms and whatnot. But shortly before Christmas, we put together an $800,000 package that involves some money going into the National Farm Animal Health and Welfare Council to give Megan a little bit more horsepower on her team, so that they can do a little bit better job of quarterbacking that action plan, and some specific projects. Marie, Dr. Pettit will talk to you about one of them this afternoon, or a little later on here, in terms of crisis communication or communications with small lot producers. Enough to say though that funding is actually coming forward. In this case, this is a match between Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the industry itself. Can spot ASF. This is disease surveillance, and one of the things that we know is that we've got to get a better job of disease surveillance, particularly as it relates to African swine fever. And Can spot ASF is a first attempt to move out from the traditional way of doing things, which is sort of the federal government CFIA, given that ASF is a named disease, and involving others, practitioners at the farm level, actual farmers themselves, trying to find these samples that are needed. Border biosecurity, and you'll all be familiar with the announcement right off the hop at the Canadian Border Services Agency of $31 million for some dog teams. We need more of those, but truth be known, we did get extra resources put into that space, and they came rather quickly. Also saw some very innovative work done by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in terms of bringing in border controls on imported feed, which we know is a risk to spreading African swine fever. And lastly, on border security, of course, you couldn't get through an airport without seeing some sort of a sign from about the dangers of importing meat into this country and the risk that it provides to the Canadian herd. Canadian Pork Excellence. This is the series of on-farm programs that we have at the Canadian Pork Council, and doing a good job here of getting these things out and running. But as part of Canadian Pork Excellence, this is how we reach out at the national level to producers across Canada about things like traceability and biosecurity. And if we go back and we think a little bit about zoning and compartmentalization, and if you flip to the next slide there, Marie, if we think about zoning and compartmentalization, the underpinnings of that, surveillance, we talked about Can spot ASF, biosecurity, traceability, those are the things that we get done with Canadian Pork Excellence. And, I would suggest that some good action taken in that space. And, if you ever want to have a kill an hour or two with Jeff Clark on traceability and what we can do with the data that we have in the pig trace system in terms of modeling of disease spread, Jeff's your man. Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, probably a group that we don't know a lot about, based out of the University of Saskatchewan. Taking on a little bit onto the wild pig file. A new file for us, the Canadian Pork Council. We haven't spent a lot of time about it, but this is an initiative funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada. And remember, I talked about a lot of departments. Here's another one: Environment. Their issue and interest in African swine fever is not African swine fever. Their issue is wild pigs as an invasive species and the damage that those animals do on the landscape. So they're working to try to figure out where we are there. Communications, you've seen it all over, and there's lots and lots of it out there that it's being done. Again, some really good work done here by the federal and provincial governments. A little bit of work done at the Canadian Pork Council in terms of our website. Small lot producers, we've discovered we have 7,000 of them in Canada at least, and we picked them up through our traceability system. And we're now trying to figure out, Mark Fynn doing some good work in this space, how actually to provide them with the information they need to ensure that the risks that are associated with those producers are managed. So producer manuals and whatnot, but more importantly, and again, Marie will talk to you about this project a little bit, about how to visit with these folks, what motivates them. We have a good understanding of how to deal with commercial producers. We're just not sure about these small lot producers. And last but not least, a lot of work done on destruction and disposal. We have to, if we get into a mess, if we get into a wreck, we need to know how to, humanely put these animals down, humanely euthanize these animals, and properly dispose of them. And there have been some interesting developments in that space, and I'm sure Mark will visit with those as well. So just a real quick spin through what I think are the top 10 actions that have happened. There's 1,000 actions yet to happen, but this will give you a little bit of flavor for it. And again, I'm hoping when we get into the Q&A that you'll have some questions that we can dig into these a little bit deeper. So Stuart, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate your presentation, realizing it was under some duress at the start, but you did a fine job. Thank you very much, Aruna. I appreciate you had a lot of information to cover and did an excellent job. And again, I think it highlights the collaboration that exists on this files across international borders. And that is a good segue to our next speaker, Dr. Paul Sundberg from Swine Health. He's Executive Director of the Swine Health Information Center in Ames, Iowa. He is a graduate, a veterinary graduate out of Iowa State, as well as did his PhD in veterinary microbiology. He brings a wealth of knowledge to the subject area in terms of swine health. Formerly, he was with the National Pork Board and Vice President of Science and Technology, and is part of the OIE delegation from the US as well as World Health Organization. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sundberg to do his presentation. It's really talking about what is the ASF Research, an update from the USA.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you to the Swine Innovation Porc for the kind invitation to participate today. This is an exciting opportunity, and I want to emphasize the attitude that African swine fever, it is an issue for both Canada and the US, and because we have a North American pork industry. And so this collaboration and communication organization around ASF and emerging diseases is an extremely important issue. And I'm thankful to be part of the panel today. I want to introduce the Swine Health Information Center and talk about the mission: protect and enhance global disease monitoring. Global includes the US, all around the world, targeted research investments, and then analysis of data to help pork industry and the pork producers. part of research involves, as Andrew said, the economic analysis, and an updated economic analysis of the effects of ASF in the US includes a look at the economics if we get the virus in the US and we last 2 years or we last 10 years, 15 to $50 billion in losses of jobs. Of course, the loss of production and the loss of reduced pig production over a 10-year period. ASF is not the only thing, though, that Chick is keeping an eye on. There's a lot of other things. We can't forget that there are things as well going around the world, and I include Canada in this because of this issue of North American pork production. But one thing that the center is doing is trying to ensure that we keep an eye on things as they move around the world, and ASF is among those, among the long list of other things that we have to keep an eye on. In 2019, with the help of the National Pork Producers Council, the center was successful in getting a $1.7 million grant from the USDA Foreign Ag Service. And that grant was to address African swine fever in Vietnam. One piece of that grant was about sharing knowledge and ideas. The University of Minnesota is heading up this portion, the section 1 of the grant that will do webinars, seminars, information, materials for Vietnamese veterinarians, both government as well as practicing veterinarians, private practicing veterinarians. So part of this is sharing knowledge and an outreach to ensure that everyone is on the same page as far as epidemiology and virology, vaccinology, those types of things. The section 2 is the piece that I'm really excited about, and that's the implementation of field projects. And I'm going to go through the pieces of this very briefly about the field projects and the analysis of the samples. We did a call for proposals early in 2020 and got proposals, went through a review process and selected proposals for funding. Some of these, you'll see that many of these line up very well with what Dr. Ambagala was talking about, what has been presented earlier. And we'll start with the ELISA assays. What we're trying to do here is look over the hill and be prepared for ASF as it comes to North America, as it comes to the US, and as it gets into the production with the opportunity for it to be endemic. Some of these things are longer term issues of not to use immediately in an outbreak, but to use them in detection, in control, and in elimination, and especially then in an eradication program. And certainly ELISAs are part of that whole process. 2 projects for ELISA evaluation were included, and that includes both serum and oral fluids. The pork board, National Pork Board, then is going to take the information from those ELISAs and do an analysis to make sure that we've got the complete picture about ELISA capability for ASF. National Pork Board is also funding a project on CSF and ELISA for classical swine fever as well. In Vietnam, we're looking at the potential for rodents to be a vector, both a mechanical and biological vector for ASF. I'll give you preliminary results. We've looked at rats and mice on outbreak farms in Vietnam. Haven't been able to find ASF either in or on the rats and mice on farms with outbreaks so far. And so there's lab work yet to do, but that's looking like a very promising area. Diagnostic performance of pen-side tests. Of course, pen-side tests for the US would mean that we'd have to have a USDA policy change for the use of pen-side tests. But again, this is trying to be prepared to manage, trying to be prepared to control, and perhaps get into an eradication program should we need it in the future. Time and temperature baking of trailers, for example, as we do now for a number of different pathogens. We want to make sure that that biosecurity step is validated for African swine fever as well. Pathways of entry are important. We're going to go on farms in Vietnam and do epi surveys with the outbreak farms to try to identify the probable pathways of entry to help inform us of what we need to look at in the US should we get ASF here. Pathways of entry include bore studs and semen movements, and we're doing a risk assessment for ASF in the bore studs and semen movements. Proposals to protocols to validate targeted removal, term tooth extraction. If you can identify animals quickly, either individually or group housed, and remove them and remove the contact animals, we may be able to stop the infection in its spot and save the rest of the production. Dr. Ambagala talked about the oral fluids, and we're really excited about the process and progress made in oral fluids, both with the CFIA as well as with USDA, and the collaboration that's going on there. So this is part of the Vietnam project, and Dr. Ambagala's heading up the oral fluids look. We're also, though, looking at the opportunity to use the outbreaks that are happening in Romania to even add to that information. And with Chekhov and USDA, we're working on trying to get the same type of samples, the same type of data that we get in Vietnam in Romania to add to that. Some broader research efforts, not specifically for Vietnam, but you'll just see the list of these, and I don't have time to go through each individual one, but I do want to point out the U.S. Pork Industry National Biosecurity Risk Assessment. This is in collaboration with Chekhov. It's in collaboration with the American Association of Swine Veterinarians and NPPC to do a broad look at the biosecurity risks of the U.S. industry, all the way from imports to markets to movements. We want to make sure that this is a key point in prevention, because we want to make sure that we don't miss something as we address the priorities. We want to make sure that we can close all of those windows that we can close to prevent ASF from getting into the U.S. And then the Chekhov National Pork Board has a list of other research projects that are underway that address both African swine fever and other FADs. And going on with that list, detection in meat, processing fluids, and other things as we go. And you'll see that some overlap here because of the funding that has gone on. One of the things that we recognize is that should we get ASF, we don't have enough accredited veterinarians to do the job in a biosecure manner to collect the samples that are needed. So Pork Board, with funding from USDA, is helping to organize a collection training program that, under the auspices of accredited veterinarians, people on the farm will be able to collect, handle, and submit samples in an FAD outbreak, and under the supervision of veterinarians. I want to mention as well, you see the slaked lime evaluation is part of this, and a little bit of overlap. USDA and the Department of Homeland Security are also doing other projects besides those that we have funded that address African swine fever, address also other foreign animal diseases, and you'll see the list here as we go on. USDA on the top right and the Center for Epidemiology and Animal Health are doing the epidemiology and looks at the disease spread models to inform our surveillance projects in Fort Collins. And with that, Stuart, I will stop. I will say that information about the center, about our research, is on swinehealth.org, and I look forward to the question and answer period in a bit. Stuart, you're muted.
Thank you, Paul, and keeping me honest here, speaking to myself, the audience of one, for your presentation. We have 2 speakers to go and have some questions that are being submitted. Our next speaker is Dr. Murray Pettit, Chief Executive Officer at Prairie Swine Center since 2018. Prior to that, he was a research scientist at the University of Saskatchewan, Department of Animal and Poultry Science, looking at markers of sperm function in both boars and bulls, and did his PhD at the my old alma mater, University of Guelph. And I'm going to have Murray take away his presentation on risk mitigation for ASF Backyard Pig Farmer Survey. Murray.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Stuart. Really pleased to be here to give a quick update on this project we have here ongoing at the Swine Center. So the goal of the project is to create an outcome where the Canadian pork sector will be in a better position to communicate with the small scale producers about African swine fever and the threat it is to the commercial pork industry. And what we need to do in order to do that is create meaningful messages that resonate with these folks such that they will appreciate what's at stake and be motivated to, I guess, employ the appropriate biosecurity steps. So the overall objective of this study is to improve our understanding of the knowledge that these small scale producers have about appropriate swine biosecurity practices and their implications for disease prevention in the Canadian commercial industry. So within that, there are 2 specific objectives we have. One is to collect information from these producers. What do they know about ASF? What do they know about biosecurity? What do they know about the risks of the commercial swine industry? But also equally as important is what motivates them. Why do they have pigs? What drives their decisions? And it's probably a safe assumption that in a lot of cases, these motivators will be different than the commercial industry, and we need to take that into account in designing effective messaging. So the second objective is to develop this messaging and really ensure that the small scale producers understand the critical importance of effective biosecurity, what's at risk to the commercial industry, and what's at risk to themselves too, because if ASF starts running through Canada, their animals are at risk too. So this project has 4 activities, and the first one is well underway, and that's to develop an online survey. And this is what I've already mentioned, is to understand what they understand about biosecurity, do they employ it, and do they understand the role biosecurity has in protecting the commercial swine herd. Accompanying that will be what we're calling focus groups A, and these are going to be a small number of focus groups held throughout various regions in Canada with groups of these small scale producers to discuss the topics and issues covered by the survey, and I will get into some of those in a few minutes. So this is really a conversation with these people to dig deeper into these issues, and this data will supplement and complement the information that we receive through the survey. What we're really looking for here is a good, thorough understanding of what motivates them, why they have pigs, what's important to them, what would they give up if they were to lose their pigs due to ASF or any other swine disease coming through Canada. And based on that, can we and how do we design appropriate communication measures? And that leads to activity 3, which is to develop those messaging and communications materials as well as a communication strategy. I should say that activity 1 is well underway. The funding for activities 2, 3, and 4 was just confirmed 2 days ago, the additional funding. So these activities are not yet underway, but activity 2 should, the focus group should start sometime here in February. When we get to the draft messaging and communications materials, we're going to create a steering committee consisting of representation from throughout the commercial industry in Canada, as well as small scale producers. And this would include pork producer organizations, various governments, and other representatives of the pork value chain. And based on the information collected from both the survey, the online survey, and the original set of focus groups, we will design this messaging. Then we'll follow this up with activity 4, which is 6 more focus groups to evaluate this messaging, beat up on it, see what's working, see what's not, and fine tune it so that we can ensure that the messaging is impactful and that it's focused appropriately so that it has the maximum effect in the target group that we're going to be sending it out to. So there's going to be 5 focus groups looking at that with the small scale producers, and the 6 will include commercial producers and representatives from the commercial industry. Small scale producers will be compensated $75 each for their participation in either of these focus groups. The way we're going to approach this is we're employing the Canadian Hub for Applied and Social Research at the University of Saskatchewan, which is a research support and consulting hub. And their mandate is to help others perform research in the social sciences in looking at things such as public opinion, human behavior, motivating factors, and they use various tools such as surveys and focus groups, which we're going to be using here. So the Chaser Lab is providing us guidance and assistance in developing the online survey and also how to effectively implement these focus groups. Social science is not necessarily something we as animal scientists do any research in, so we're employing the experts in that field to assist us so that we do this properly. So the Chaser Lab will analyze the data collected from both the survey and the focus groups. They will provide us with a final report when done, and the survey and focus groups will be going out in both official languages. So for the survey, based on an estimated 3,800 backyard producers that we feel we can actually potentially get this survey in front of through email lists and other methods, we're going to need a total of about 349 surveys collected or filled out rather as a minimum in order to have an accurate data set. What we're really hoping to do is to be able to analyze the data either by regions, such as the Western provinces, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes. So the number of surveys will go up as we require 320 per region. And if we have enough completed surveys, we can even look at analyzing the data by province, but we do need a lot of completed surveys. One of the challenges to this study will be the completion rate of the surveys and how many people will actually take the time to do so. So we have some incentives to encourage that, including a chance to win one of 3 iPads. The questions have been designed with the assistance of many collaborators throughout Canada. You can see the list of the organizations there. Many of the provincial pork councils, the Canadian Pork Council, CDPQ in Quebec, several government ministries, BC, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, the CFIA, and the Canadian Animal Health Surveillance System. And folks from these organizations have all contributed their input and critique of the original set of questions we came up with, and have contributed a lot to the creation of these questions. So I do want to thank all of these people and organizations. The Chaser Lab at the U of S will create the final wording of each question so that in an appropriate manner, so that the way the questions are asked do not inadvertently influence the results. And again, this is the advantage of having some social scientists participate in this study. Once this survey is ready for distribution, just a little bit later here this month in January, the link to the survey will be provided to all the collaborators listed at the top of the slide here, and they have agreed to reach out to those small scale producers in their databases and push this survey out to them. A concern that's been raised by many of the people we've been talking to on this thing is that there may be some reluctance on behalf of the small scale producers to work with the commercial industry. So the survey is being presented as a University of Saskatchewan Chaser Lab study, but we will be receiving the final report. We're using some other resources as well, such as social media and advertisements to push the survey in front of other small scale producers. And as I said, the focus groups should begin sometime in February. I just got a couple of slides here. I just wanted to show some quick examples of some of the questions. We've tried to keep them as a multiple choice or a yes, no kind of answer. We're aiming for approximately 20 questions because we want people to be able to get through this quickly, and we don't want to take up too much of their time because that will hopefully encourage more people to fill out the survey. So you can see we're looking at why do you keep pigs, how are they housed, inside, outside, what kind of penning or other structures do you have holding them in? Have you seen any examples of wild or feral pigs around your property? Another area that we're definitely digging into is what do you feed your pigs? We're looking at both complete pig feed that the commercial industry would be very used to homegrown feeds and or human table scraps or restaurant or bakery food or whatnot. We're trying to get a handle on what they're actually feeding, as well as do they think there are any risk associated with feeding these food waste to their pigs. Another set of questions looks at how do you reduce the risk of disease in your pigs? Again, multiple choice so that they can go through it very quickly and tick off the ones that apply to them. And typically at the end of these questions, there's an other answer that they can fill in if there's something that we haven't covered in the list. So that's just a quick example of some of the questions. As I said, there's going to be approximately 20. But the outcomes of this study is that the final report produced by the Chaser Lab, as well as the messaging and communication materials and strategy that has been developed through this project, will be distributed to all study participants that I've already shown, the CPC, the various provincial pork boards, and the provincial departments of agriculture. Basically, we want to share this wide and far so that all areas of the commercial industry can have access to this information and use it to everyone's advantage. And really the final outcome is hopefully that the commercial pork sector in Canada will be better positioned to effectively communicate with these small scale producers about ASF and the various risks it presents to not only the commercial industry, but to the small scale producers themselves. So the only other thing I wish to do is acknowledge the various organizations and the people within them who have helped us with developing these questions for the survey. I've mentioned them already, as well as the organizations who've contributed project funding for this particular project, as well as continued core funding to the Prairie Swine Center. And I thank you for your time, and Stuart, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Murray. Appreciate your presentation. Finally, our last but not least speaker, Mark Flynn. Mark is currently the Manager of Quality Assurance and Animal Care Programs at Manitoba Pork. He has been involved in a variety of subcommittee work regarding mass euthanasia or humane mass euthanasia as an emergency response. Certainly, I think we are aware of the interruptions that have occurred at processing facilities due to COVID. It's maybe underlined the urgency of this topic, and Mark serves on a variety of committees both in Manitoba, Western Canada, and for the Canadian Pork Council. So Mark, I'm going to have you take.
Thanks for the introduction, Stuart. I'll jump right into it. I've already seen some good questions show up in the Q&A, so I just want to make sure we have lots of time to go over those too. So, There we go. So I'm going to cover what work we're doing currently in Canada to prepare for large-scale emergency depopulation of swine in the event of a border closing event, basically like a foreign animal disease caused by something like African swine fever. This slide you've seen before, lots of groups working on stuff. What I'm going to be focusing on is really the destruction piece under preparedness planning. Just to give you an idea, within this, there's two subcommittees or subgroups that are set up to deal with destruction specifically. There's another subgroup that's set up to deal with disposal. But under the destruction side of things, we have had a destruction technical expert subgroup that's set up. And the major objective of that subgroup was really to discuss all the options for depopulation and euthanasia out there, both methods that currently exist and are used every day on farm for sick and injured pigs, but also looking at some of the higher capacity methods that are emerging and coming up. And so that group went through and had a discussion about all those different methods, new and emerging, as well as the established ones, and perform some assessment on it based on the capacity each of those methods has, the number of resources like people and equipment and stuff that are needed, as well as the animal welfare aspect of it, among other things. So through that, we did an assessment and developed some recommendations and some suggestions. And then the other group that we have set up for destruction was an expert panel review subgroup. And that was basically to look at the assessment that was done by the other subgroup and make sure that it was in alignment with other standards like the OIE or AVMA or Code of Practice, all those sorts of things, making sure they're in alignment there and in alignment with the best understood published science that's out there too. So between those two groups, we've come up on some agreement, I guess, on acceptable depopulation methods. But I should say the work is ongoing here, and so there's further developments, I guess, to be had. But just to cover some of the options for depopulation methods, we kind of group them together in different options. And so we have gaseous methods of euthanasia. So carbon dioxide is very common. There's also some work being done, I guess, on nitrogen, both in a free gaseous form, as well as a nitrogen that's contained within high expansive foam. So those gaseous methods are really the ones that have the opportunity to be a higher capacity method, I guess, out of some of the ones that we're dealing with. Of course, we discussed some of the physical methods like penetrating and non-penetrated captive bolt guns and firearms and what sort of capacity and we could sort of see with those, as well as electrical methods. And there is some emerging stuff coming up with electrical methods, at least as far as how we might process animals or how we might euthanize animals using electricity in a high capacity fashion. Of course, in these conversations, we have to talk about the abattoirs as well and what role abattoirs can play to help us in doing some depopulation as well. And then there are other methods discussed as well, such as lethal injection. Some of those methods, like lethal injection, might be very good for animal welfare, but very hard to do at a high capacity, and there's other restrictions in place there. So it's important to note, I guess, looking at all these depopulation methods, that we need all the tools we can get in our toolbox, and different scenarios are going to call for different methods, and it's going to vary across the country and all sorts of things. So it's important for us to consider all of these as we're developing. It's not going to be one method that helps us in this situation. So, in looking at the different methods and the different technology that's out there, we're trying to determine the acceptability of these, when it comes to animal welfare and public perception and that sort of thing. And so we look at what we would consider acceptable, which methods are acceptable, which methods we may consider acceptable under trial settings, as in there's good anecdotal proof or some trial proof or whatever to suggest that it's it's an okay method for animal welfare, but we need to do further trials and whatnot to completely verify it to be an acceptable method. We also have some methods potentially that would be not recommended for use, and then there's also things that are just completely unacceptable when it comes to methods of euthanasia. So we consider all those things when we go through the assessment of the methods available. I'd be remiss to say that it's not just work that's happening at the national level. There's stuff going on throughout the country too. And so in the West, you know, we're doing a lot of planning within the Western region collectively, because we're so highly integrated within there, as well as in individual provinces. We're also doing work to, you know, determine methods for depopulation there. Ontario is doing the same. They're doing very well. Actually, they've, you know, unfortunately, I think because some of the fallout from COVID or whatever, they are further ahead because of those things in developing plans for dealing with surplus pigs. Quebec's also working on it, and regionally, the Maritimes are as well. So, lots of work being done, lots of groups involved, and lots of discussion being had. I don't think we're quite close to the finish line at this moment for planning, but we're definitely making progress on it. And with that, I will end my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's certainly, given the fact that almost 2/3 to 70% of the pork in this, or pigs in this country, must find a home outside the country, it really underlines in the face of African swine fever outbreak what we would be faced with. So I think with that, I'd like to thank all the presenters. I will get to the questions, except I hit the wrong button here. I would be remiss to not thanking Leslie Walsh for our communications officer, for her hard work at setting this up. And I have just had my, I think that takes me back, and I got the question and answers. Okay. So some of these are directed, and I think our presenters have said they can stay a few minutes longer. So I'm gonna, there is some directed to Dr. Ambagala. So the first one, realizing that farms will likely submit samples after a mortality threshold is reached, is it better to submit superficial lymph nodes from dead pigs or collect oral fluids from asymptomatic pigs, understanding that the spread of ASF among pens is very slow?
I think it was John. So thanks, John, for the question. And I think at this point, we are looking into like all these sample types. It's not a single sample type. And I see your point, like, and we don't know how and which samples types will be used. As I mentioned, it's very early stages of evaluation. But to me, these oral fluid and any other sample types that we are looking at, alternative samples, has to be used in together as a tool, as a toolbox. So we will be using, to me, to be effective surveillance program, we have to incorporate surveillance of the dead animals, as well as collecting oral fluids from the healthy animals. That's where I see as a whole very effective surveillance program.
Okay, I have one that talks about ASF vaccines. It's quite a long question. So I guess the question is, USDA scientists have, and this is to Paul Sundberg, USDA scientists have published a paper on gene-deleted attenuated vaccine that is protective, and VIDO is working on an adenoviral subunit vaccine. Any developments on these, and are there concerns of revisions to virulence for attenuated virus vaccines? I think I'll cut it off there, and if there's others that see the complete question, if there's parts of that they would like to contribute. So Paul, if you want to address that one, or if Aruna wants to address it, I think you would likely be the appropriate people.
Yeah, I'll start, Stuart, thanks. And Aruna, then certainly ask for your comments. Yes, USDA has published their ability to propagate the ASF virus, an attenuated ASF virus. That's a really important step because propagation is a limiting factor in vaccine development. You've got to be able to grow this virus in quantity sufficient to produce a vaccine. That's still a long process, and there's still a long ways to go with that because that has yet to be transferred to the animal health industries for development of vaccine after even that propagation step. It's very important. Vaccines have to be safe, they have to be effective. Best vaccines are going to stop infection, not just stop clinical signs. Clinical signs are a very important thing, but stop infection and the carrier state, as well as they'll be differentiable. So we'll be able to tell a vaccinated animal from a wild virus infected animal. All of those things have to happen. One of the things, because of the weight of the effort that's in vaccines around the world, that's one of the things that with even the Pork Board, the Swine Health Information Center, we're trying to do research that will have quick impact. And certainly there's a lot of effort around vaccines other ways, but we want to make sure that we have quick impact and still be in support of vaccine development. Aruna, any comments?
Yeah, no, I think, thanks, Paul. I think, yes, so USDA has gene-deleted vaccine, and I know they're working on a DVAR test as well as to go with it. And as Paul mentioned, that they have identified a cell line that can propagate. We also obtained that cell line to see some of the work that we can do it at the NCFAD. And at VIDO, I know we are collaborating with VIDO, and VIDO is making vaccines, and we have been working with VIDO for many, many years on the vaccines that they develop and doing all the animal experiments to evaluate those vaccine candidates. And one of the platforms that they have is the adenovirus, and we do have an ongoing project that with VIDO or evaluate some of those vaccines that they will develop. So yeah, I mean, reverting to virulence is a concern when you have attenuated vaccines, but I think some of these vaccines that have been now developed have multiple deletions just to prevent that sort of a reverting to virulence. So yeah, the ones that, and like Paul mentioned, yeah, there are a number of gene-deleted mutants vaccines are available now. In China, they have some vaccines also developed. So I think the main issue is the propagation of the vaccine and make enough vaccines that can be commercialized. So that's a challenge right now. I think most of the scientists facing at this point.
Okay, Aruna, there's another question that came in. Do you anticipate that the National Center will be involved in confirmatory negative testing of herds from within a primary control zone so that animals can be moved to slaughter or export if there was an infection within Canada?
Yes, so I think NCFAD will be involved in testing any samples that is coming from the primary control zone, and whether they will be moving out. That's not a quick thing that I can answer. I think that's a CFIA decision, how they are going to deal with it from the primary control zone, whether the animals will leave or not. But yes, for NCFAD, we will be involved in all diagnosis and confirming those cases that are coming from a primary control zone.
Okay, this one's for John Ross on, I think Dan Hernick's asking a question. Can you explain how zoning and compartmentalization is performed in 30 seconds or less? No, I realize it's a big explanation, but.
And certainly, Dan, happy to spend some time with you on this to go through the full hour-long answer to the question. But largely what you've got with zoning is a post-outbreak exercise. So with zoning, we're trying to establish the zone in which the disease is present and the disease in the zone in which the disease is not present. So an infected zone and a non-infected zone. We would set those zones up largely based on either a geography. Things are going in your favor. If it happens, that you've got a set of mountains and an ocean on either side, it makes for geographic barriers that we can use, or political. And in some respects, it's what the importing country actually expects of you that establishes the zone itself. But the idea being is that you would demonstrate to your trading partners or demonstrate to anybody else that actually the stakeholders in Canada that you have control of the disease. The disease is on this side of the line and not on the other, and you use it primarily as an eradication tool. You get a ring around that disease, and then you eradicate all of the disease within it. So, from the Food Inspection Agency's perspective, zoning very much means to eradicate a disease. They would establish the zone, and then controls are put in place to handle the movement in and out of the zone itself. If you compare that with a compartment, the compartment is established pre-outbreak. And the idea is to demonstrate that your supply chain, however extensive that might be, is free of the disease. And you do that largely through two methods. One is an enhanced biosecurity, if you will, that demonstrates that you have control of what moves in and out of your compartment. And then secondly, you demonstrate the effectiveness of your compartment by undertaking surveillance on an ongoing basis. So the compartments are set up after or before a disease outbreak. They can be set up tomorrow if you wanted. And the idea being that even though you had a compartment that was within a disease zone, so your compartment actually exists in a zone that may or may not have disease, you can continue to trade, continue to move product. The tricky thing around all of this is that we have a good understanding of how to set up zones, and we can see how they work. We're watching it unfold in Germany as we speak. So Germany is part of an agreement that Canada has with the European Union to respect each other's zones. They were quickly put in place in Germany. They were recognized by Canada, and we allowed trade to continue to happen. Compartments, on the other hand, a brand new thing. Nobody's actually done one for African swine fever, so we're kind of building the system in Canada as we speak. And I know at the Canadian Pork Council, we've got leadership in two specific areas. One around what the standards are for the compartment, so how much you have to test, what you're allowed to do, what level of biosecurity, those sorts of standards questions. And then secondly, a framework of actually how you would recognize that a compartment was complying with all of those standards, and those roles between the industry and government are being discussed as we speak. And then the last step of that obviously would get our trading partners to recognize that compartment is an effective way to control the disease. So all of those things are done. The way they're set up, zones established by CFIA, compartments established by industry, recognized by CFIA, all of that, of course, have to be respected by our trading partners or accepted by our trading partners. So multiple levels of discussion in that space, Dan. But as I said, I mean, we could spend some time on that if you'd like to give me a call.
Oh, thank you, John. I realize some of the speakers have to take other calls. I'll do one or two more. This is to Murray about the survey. There's a question as it concerns whether an online survey is better or worse than a paper survey, and are pet pigs considered small producers? The owner of a single pig who's a pet pig.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Right now the survey is limited to online. I think it's the most effective way we can reach out to these people. We're also going to be trolling or looking through some Facebook groups and other social media things to try and locate these people. But again, we direct them to the online survey if we can find them to connect with. Even a print ad that we took out in a publication in BC will direct to the online survey. It's just, I think it's going to be somewhat challenging to find these people, and that's why we've employed the assistance of all the various pork producer agencies as well as the other organizations, because everyone has a an incomplete list of the small scale producers in their respective regions. And so hopefully collectively we can get in front of them all. So at this point, there's no plan to go with a print copy. The other thing, yes, if you have pigs as a pet, that would be included in this in this survey rather. In fact, there is a question that talks about, you know, if where are your pigs housed, and in the house is one of the answers. And there's also questions about how many pigs on average do you have on your site per year, as well as why do you keep pigs, and pets is definitely one of the options.
Okay, I think I'm, given that we're 15 minutes over, I think I'm going to direct the final questions that the presenters take a look, because I think there's a name beside most of them. And if we need to have contact by those individuals with that question, I'm sorry we couldn't handle them all. Some good questions. I realize it was an ambitious undertaking to get 6 speakers in an hour and 15 minutes and have some questions as well. I think everyone did an excellent job. I appreciate the work you put into it. And I, again, would like to thank Leslie Walsh, our communications officer for Swine Innovation Porc, for her work behind the scenes of putting this together. And would inform you that continue to follow our website or some of the information we put out for future webinars that you could tie into regarding research, and certainly bring you to the point of saying that we're going to as well look at trying to put together a new ongoing list of priorities for the next what we anticipate as the next research cluster that would start after, I guess, April 1st, 2023. And assuming there's still money, because a significant amount of dollars comes from the federal government, as you've seen. But we certainly appreciate Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada putting money into the swine industry research. Again, I would like to thank each of the presenters for all you've done in preparation for this. And again, wish everyone a healthy new year as we go into uncharted areas. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Bye, everybody.